Pick one of my girls, human. Everyone laughed when I took the ugliest, but she very special. The taste of blood filled Magnus's mouth as consciousness returned to him. His body ached with the memory of yesterday's combat, muscles protesting as he shifted on the hard stone floor. The dim light filtering through the barred window revealed the cramped cell he'd called home for the past 3 cycles. Outside, the alien sun cast a pale blue glow across the prison yard where other captives shuffled about, their forms hunched and defeated. Magnus was not like them. He refused to be broken. A guard approached his cell, blue skin gleaming with ceremonial markings that designated his rank among the Aurians. The tall, muscular alien towered over Magnus as the cell door scraped open. "On your feet, human," the guard commanded, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. "The Supreme has requested your presence." Magnus stood slowly, careful not to show any sign of weakness, despite the pain lancing through his ribs. 3 broken, if he had to guess. The fight with the wild Zaxir beast had been brutal, but he'd managed to drive his wooden spear through the creature's eye when it lunged for his throat. The crowd had roared with approval, not expecting the fragile-looking human to survive. That had been his 7th victory in the arena. "What does your Supreme want with me?" Magnus asked, his voice raspy from disuse. The guard didn't answer, merely prodded him forward with the blunt end of his spear. Magnus moved through the narrow corridors of the prison complex, passing other cells where humans and various alien species were held. Most avoided his gaze. Victory in the arena meant little when tomorrow could bring death. As they emerged into the courtyard, the full light of the alien sun washed over them. Unlike Earth's yellow star, this one cast everything in a pale blue tint that had taken months for Magnus to adjust to. The planet area was beautiful in its harshness, vast forests with trees that reached impossible heights, creatures that defied Earth's evolutionary patterns, and the Aurians themselves, a species whose strength and technology had allowed them to subjugate several worlds, including colonies from Earth. Across the yard, Magnus spotted Coral, another human fighter who had survived almost as many bouts as he had. Coral's dark skin was marked with fresh wounds, evidence of his own recent battle. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication passing between them. If the Supreme had called for both of them, something unusual was happening. "Magnus," Coral acknowledged with a nod when they were brought together. "You look terrible." Magnus managed a weak smile. "Should see the other guy." The guards escorted them beyond the prison walls for the first time since their capture. Magnus took deep breaths of the air, cleaner than the stale stench of the cells. They were led through a marketplace where Aurians stopped to stare at the human captives. Children pointed with curious blue fingers, while their parents pulled them back, as though humanity might be contagious. The city of Auris sprawled before them, not the gleaming metropolis of advanced technology that Magnus had imagined from inside his cell, but a place of stone and wood, remarkably similar to ancient human cities, despite being on a world light years from Earth. The Aurians, for all their physical differences, had developed along surprisingly parallel lines to humanity. At the center of the city stood a massive structure that could only be the palace of the Supreme, a towering edifice of dark stone that seemed to absorb the blue light of the sun rather than reflect it. Guards with ornate spears stood at attention as they approached. "Why are we here?" Coral whispered. Magnus shook his head. "Maybe they're finally going to execute us. After all the entertainment we provided?" Doubtful. They were led through cavernous halls decorated with tapestries depicting great hunts and battles. Aurian nobles in elaborate clothing watched them pass, whispering behind painted fans. The wealth on display was staggering compared to the squalor of the prison. Finally, they reached a vast chamber where a single figure sat upon a raised dais. The Supreme Ruler of Auris, Ariana, was not what Magnus had expected. Rather than a muscular warrior like most Aurians, she was slender, almost delicate in appearance. Her blue skin was several shades lighter than her subjects, marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the light streaming through high windows. "The human champions," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber, despite its soft tone. "I have heard much about your performances in my arena." Magnus remained silent, studying the ruler carefully. Beside her stood several armored guards with spears and curved blades at their belts. One wrong move would mean death. You wonder why I have brought you here, Ariana continued, rising from her throne. She descended the steps with fluid grace. Today marks the Festival of Selection, a time-honored tradition among my people. And this year, I have decided to include you. Include us in what exactly? Coral asked, earning a sharp jab from a guard's spear haft. Ariana smiled, revealing teeth as white as polished bone. In the choosing of mates, of course. Magnus felt a chill run down his spine. We're not breeding stock. No, she agreed, circling them slowly. You are warriors who have proven your worth through combat and survival. Qualities that are highly valued among the Aurian people. Qualities that would strengthen our bloodlines. She clapped her hands and a side door opened. 5 young Aurian women entered, each adorned in elaborate clothing that left little to the imagination. 4 of them were strikingly beautiful by Aurian standards, tall with perfectly proportioned bodies, their blue skin gleaming with health and youth. They moved with practiced grace, their expressions haughty as they regarded the human captives. The 5th was different, smaller than the others, with a slight limp to her gait. Her skin was a paler blue, almost gray in places, marked with what appeared to be scars rather than the decorative patterns of the others. Her eyes, however, caught Magnus's attention immediately. While the others' gazes held contempt or indifference, hers burned with intelligence and an intensity that seemed to pierce right through him. My daughter, Ariana announced proudly, gesturing to the 5 women, bred and trained to be perfect companions for warriors of exceptional value. Today, as reward for your survival in the arena, you may each select one as your mate. Magnus exchanged a glance with Coral, seeing his own confusion mirrored there. This was not at all what they had expected. And if we refuse? Magnus asked. Ariana's smile didn't waver. Then you return to the arena, where the next bout awaits with creatures far deadlier than any you have faced before. Few survive the 7th cycle of combat. None have survived the 8th. A thinly veiled death sentence, then. What happens if we choose? Coral pressed. You will be moved to the warriors' quarter of the city, given certain freedoms, though naturally under guard. You will continue to fight in ceremonial combat during festivals, but your survival will no longer be in constant question. Ariana's gaze hardened. And you will provide my daughters with offspring that combine the best qualities of both our species. So they would become breeding stock after all, just with better accommodations. Choose, Ariana commanded, gesturing toward the 5 women. Coral stepped forward first, his eyes immediately drawn to the tallest of the daughters, whose beauty was obvious even by human standards. She responded with a slight smile, clearly accustomed to being the first choice. I choose her, Coral said, pointing to the tall beauty. Ariana nodded approvingly. Varine, an excellent choice. She has the blood of 10 generations of champion warriors. All eyes turned to Magnus now. He studied each of the remaining women carefully, noting how 4 of them straightened, preening under his attention. Only the scarred one remained still, her unusual eyes never leaving his face. Something about her called to him. Perhaps it was the lack of artifice, or maybe it was the quiet strength he sensed beneath her damaged exterior. In her, he saw something of himself, someone who had suffered but refused to be defined by that suffering. I choose her, Magnus said, pointing to the scarred woman. A shocked silence fell over the chamber, followed by poorly concealed laughter from several of the Aurian nobles. Even Coral looked at him with disbelief. Naira? Ariana's voice held genuine surprise. You wish to select Naira? The scarred woman, Naira, lifted her chin slightly, the only indication that she had heard her name. Is she not available? For selection? Magnus asked, keeping his voice level. She is, Ariana replied slowly, but she is imperfect, an experiment that did not achieve the desired results. The others are far superior in every way. Then I choose imperfection, Magnus stated firmly. Her! The laughter grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. Naira's expression remained unchanged, but Magnus thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. Ariana studied him for a long moment before nodding. Very well, Naira is yours. Perhaps you humans value different qualities than we do. She turned to address a nearby attendant. Prepare quarters for our champions and their chosen mates. The ceremony will be conducted at sunset. As the chamber began to empty, Coral approached Magnus. "Have you lost your mind?" he whispered. "You could have had any of the others." "I made my choice," Magnus replied simply. "Everyone's laughing at you." "Why choose the ugly one when—" Magnus cut him off with a sharp look. "She's not a thing to be judged by appearance." "None of them are." Coral shook his head. "Your funeral, friend. Just don't come crying to me when you realize your mistake." Guards separated them then, leading each toward different corridors. Magnus was taken to a small but well-appointed room with actual furniture, a luxury after months on a stone floor. There was even a window, albeit barred, that looked out over a garden where blue-furred creatures resembling rabbits hopped among strange flowering plants. He was provided with clean clothing and water to wash away the grime of the prison. His wounds were treated by an Aurian healer whose touch was surprisingly gentle, despite her obvious distaste for human physiology. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden, the door to his room opened. Naira entered alone, dressed in simple garments that stood in stark contrast to the elaborate costumes of her sisters. Up close, her scars were more prominent, a network of fine lines across her arms and neck, disappearing beneath her clothing. "They said I should prepare you for the ceremony," she spoke for the first time, her voice lower and huskier than the typical Aurian female. Magnus gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please sit." She hesitated before complying, her movements careful, deliberate. "You surprised everyone today, including you." A small smile touched her lips. "Especially me." "Why?" Magnus asked. "Surely you've had suitors before." Naira laughed, a sound without humor. "I am a failed experiment, human. My purpose was to develop enhanced traits that would benefit our bloodlines. Instead, I emerged flawed, physically weaker than my sisters, marked by the procedures that were meant to perfect me." "What kind of procedures?" She touched one of the scars on her arm. "Attempts to enhance natural abilities. My sisters received treatments that perfected their bodies, made them stronger, more agile, more beautiful. Mine went differently." "How so?" Naira's eyes met his, and again he was struck by their intensity. "Where they gained physical perfection, I gained something else, something the Supreme considers far less valuable." "Which is?" Instead of answering, she rose and moved to the window. "The ceremony will begin soon. The guards will come for you shortly." She turned back to him. "You should know that this is not a choice that can be unmade. Once the binding is complete, we are paired until death." "I understand," Magnus said, though in truth he understood very little about what was happening. "Do you?" Her gaze was penetrating. "You could have chosen any of my sisters. They are everything an Aurian male would desire. Why choose me?" Magnus considered his answer carefully. "Because when I looked at them, I saw emptiness behind their eyes. When I looked at you, I saw something real." Naira's expression softened momentarily before her guard went back up. "Pretty words from a pretty human. Let's see if they hold true after the binding." Before he could question her further, guards arrived to escort them to the ceremony. They were led to a circular courtyard where Coral and Vereen already waited alongside Ariana and various important-looking Aurians. The setting sun bathed everything in deep purple light, giving the scene an otherworldly quality that reminded Magnus forcefully of how far he was from home. The ceremony itself was brief but strange. Ariana spoke words in the Aurian language while attendants drew symbolic patterns on the foreheads of both humans and their chosen mates using a blue paste. When it was Magnus's turn, he felt an odd tingling sensation where the paste touched his skin. "With these marks, you are bound," Ariana declared when the painting was complete. "May your unions bring strength to both our peoples." As the final words were spoken, Magnus felt a sudden jolt, as though an electric current had passed between him and Naira. By her sharp intake of breath, she had felt it too. Their eyes met, and for an instant, Magnus had the disorienting sensation of looking at himself through her eyes. The moment passed quickly, leaving him slightly dizzy. When he looked at Naira again, her expression was guarded, but there was a new wariness there that hadn't been present before. "The binding is complete," Ariana announced, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Take them to their quarters. Tomorrow they will begin their new duties." The warriors' quarter turned out to be a section of the city adjacent to the training grounds where Aurian soldiers honed their skills. Magnus and Naira were given a modest dwelling with 2 rooms, far from luxurious but infinitely better than a prison cell. Guards were posted outside, a reminder that despite their improved status, they were still captives. "What happens now?" Magnus asked once they were alone. Naira moved about the space, examining their new home with clinical detachment. "Now, we live as mates. You will train with the warriors, fight in ceremonial combat during festivals, and eventually," she trailed off. "Eventually what?" "Eventually, we are expected to produce offspring." Her tone was matter-of-fact. "That is the purpose of the selection ceremony." Magnus sat heavily on the edge of the sleeping platform. "Is that even possible? Between our species?" "The Supreme believes it is. Our scientists have studied human physiology extensively since your people established colonies in this sector. There have been experiments." The implication made Magnus's skin crawl. "And if it doesn't work?" Naira's expression darkened. "Then we become expendable." A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the strange calls of nocturnal creatures filled the air as darkness descended fully on Horus. "You should rest," Naira finally said. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "Where will you sleep?" Magnus asked, noting there was only one sleeping platform. "I will take the floor." "I am accustomed to discomfort." Magnus shook his head. "No, the platform is large enough for both of us. We can share it without crossing boundaries." Naira looked surprised but nodded. "As you wish." They settled awkwardly on opposite sides of the platform, backs to each other. Despite his exhaustion, Magnus found sleep elusive. Questions swirled in his mind. About Earth, about his future on this alien world, and about the woman lying beside him with her mysterious scars and penetrating gaze. "Why did they call you a failed experiment?" he asked softly, not sure if she was still awake. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, "Because I did not become what they wanted." "Which was?" Another pause. "A mindless vessel of physical perfection, designed to breed strong warriors without the inconvenience of independent thought. And instead the procedures enhance my mind rather than my body. I see things others cannot, feel things others do not." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They fear what they cannot control." "What things do you see?" Magnus asked. "Truths, intentions, sometimes fragments of thoughts." She shifted slightly. "When you chose me today, I saw your mind. Just for an instant. You are not what I expected. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but it is interesting." With that cryptic statement, she fell silent. Eventually, Magnus's exhaustion overcame his curiosity, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep, filled with dreams of blue-skinned figures and strange ceremonies. Morning arrived with the harsh clanging of a bell. Magnus woke to find Naira already up, dressed in training garments similar to those worn by Aurian warriors. She tossed a bundle of clothing toward him. "Put these on. You're expected at the training grounds immediately." Magnus dressed quickly, noting that the garments were well made but designed to allow freedom of movement. "What exactly will I be doing?" "Learning to fight like an Aurian warrior," she replied. "The ceremonial combats are different from the arena battles you've experienced. There are rules, techniques, specific weapons. And you? What will you do while I'm training?" A shadow crossed her face. "I have my own duties." Before he could press further, guards arrived to escort him to the training grounds. Magnus looked back as he was led away, but Naira had already turned her attention elsewhere, effectively dismissing him. The training grounds were a vast open space where dozens of Aurian warriors practiced with various weapons: spears, curved swords, bows, and what appeared to be throwing knives. Coral was already there, awkwardly attempting to mimic the movements of an Aurian instructor with a wooden practice sword. "Ah, the human who chose imperfection arrives," called out a deep voice. A massively built Aurian warrior approached, his blue skin adorned with elaborate battle scars that seemed to be marks of pride rather than misfortune. "I am Drex, weapons master. You will address me as Master Drex." Magnus nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the condescension in the warrior's tone. "Let us see what skills you possess," Drex said, tossing him a wooden practice spear. "Attack me." Magnus caught the weapon smoothly, testing its weight. It was heavier than it looked, the balance different from the crude spears he'd used in the arena. Still, a weapon was a weapon. He circled Drex cautiously, noting the warrior's stance and the way he held his own practice spear. The Aurian was clearly experienced, his body relaxed yet ready to move in any direction. Without warning, Magnus lunged, feinting high before switching to a low strike aimed at Drex's legs. The Aurian parried easily, countering with a sweep that nearly took Magnus's feet out from under him. Only a quick backward leap saved him from falling. "Not bad," Drex acknowledged, "but predictable." They exchanged several more blows, with Magnus on the defensive more often than not. Drex was faster and stronger, but Magnus had survived the arena by learning to read his opponents. He began to detect patterns in the Aurian's movements, the slight shift of weight that telegraphed his next attack. When Drex lunged with a powerful thrust, Magnus was ready. He sidestepped, letting the spear pass him by inches, then struck the shaft with his own weapon, while simultaneously hooking his foot behind Drex's ankle. The combination sent the Aurian stumbling forward, off balance. A cheer went up from some of the watching warriors, quickly silenced when Drex regained his footing and turned back with a dangerous gleam in his eye. "Clever," he said, his tone suggesting it was not entirely a compliment. "But clever only gets you so far against superior strength." He attacked again, this time with a series of rapid strikes that drove Magnus backward. One blow slipped past Magnus's guard, striking his shoulder with enough force to numb his arm. Another caught him across the ribs, the same ribs that had been broken in the arena and had barely begun to heal. Pain exploded through Magnus's side, dropping him to one knee. Drex stood over him, practice spear pointed at his throat. "Yield," the Aurian commanded. "I yield," Magnus managed through gritted teeth. Drex nodded, lowering his weapon. "You have potential, human. More than expected." He looked around at the other warriors. "Pair him with Corvo for basic forms training. We need to correct his technique before he develops bad habits." For the rest of the morning, Magnus trained alongside the Aurian warriors, learning their fighting style through repetitive drills and forms. Despite the lingering pain in his ribs, he pushed himself to match the pace set by his new training partner, a younger Aurian named Corvo, who seemed less contemptuous than many of his comrades. By midday, Magnus's muscles burned with exertion and sweat soaked his training garments. When the bell signaled the meal break, he was more than ready for rest. "You did well," Corvo said as they walked toward the dining hall. "Most new recruits cannot last the morning session on their first day." "I'm not exactly a new recruit," Magnus reminded him. "I've been fighting for my life for months." Corvo nodded. "True, but arena fighting is chaotic, desperate. What we teach here is disciplined, controlled. It requires different strengths." He gave Magnus a curious look. "Why did you choose Naira at the ceremony?" "Everyone is talking about it." "Why shouldn't I have chosen her?" "She is different. The others, they are bred for perfection. Naira was an experiment that went wrong." "So I've heard." "What exactly was this experiment?" Corvo glanced around before lowering his voice. "They say she was meant to have enhanced physical attributes like her sisters, but instead, the procedures affected her mind. Some believe she can see into the thoughts of others." "Can she?" "I don't know. Such abilities are forbidden in our society. Those who demonstrate them are usually—" He trailed off. "Usually what?" "Eliminated," Corvo finished quietly. "Naira was spared only because she is the Supreme's daughter, but she is kept apart from others most of the time." This new information troubled Magnus deeply. If what Corvo said was true, Naira lived under constant threat of execution for abilities she never asked for. The dining hall was a large open space where warriors sat on low benches at long tables. Aurian servants brought platters of food, strange fruits, what appeared to be bread, and some kind of roasted meat that Magnus couldn't identify. He spotted Coral sitting with Vereen and a group of warriors, laughing as though he'd been among them for years rather than a single day. Magnus took his food to a less crowded table, wondering where Naira was and what duties had kept her from joining the meal. He was halfway through eating when a commotion at the entrance drew his attention. A hunting party had returned, dragging the carcass of an enormous blue-furred creature with multiple legs and wickedly curved tusks. The warriors crowded around, examining the beast with appreciative comments about its size and ferocity. A forest stalker, Corvo explained, seeing Magnus's interest. One of the most dangerous predators in the region. They rarely venture this close to the city. Yet this one did, observed an older warrior who had joined their table. The third this season. Something is driving them from their territory. Or someone, another warrior suggested. There are rumors of rogue humans establishing camps in the deep forest. Magnus's pulse quickened. Humans? From the colonies? The warriors exchanged glances. Not your concern, human, the older one said dismissively. Finish your meal. Afternoon training begins soon. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of physical exertion as Magnus was drilled in Aurian fighting techniques. By sunset, his body ached in ways he hadn't experienced even after arena combat. When he was finally released to return to his quarters, he could barely walk without wincing. He found Naira waiting, a small pot of something steaming on a heating stone. Sit, she commanded, gesturing to the sleeping platform. Remove your shirt. Too exhausted to argue, Magnus complied. Naira approached with the pot and began applying a warm, aromatic paste to his bruised ribs. Her touch was gentle, but clinical, with none of the awkwardness he might have expected. This will help with the pain and accelerate healing, she explained. Drex is known for being especially hard on new warriors he sees as challenging his authority. How do you know I trained with Drex? A slight smile touched her lips. News travels quickly in the warrior's quarter, especially when a human manages to momentarily unbalance the weapons master. Magnus studied her as she worked. In the dim light of their quarters, with her attention focused on her task, he could better appreciate the subtle beauty of her features. Her scars, rather than detracting from her appearance, gave her face character that her perfect sisters lacked. I heard something interesting today, he said carefully, about your differences. Her hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. Did you? They say you can read minds. Is it true? Naira sat back, replacing the lid on the pot. Not exactly. I don't hear thoughts as words or see images, as you might imagine. It's more impressions, feelings, sometimes stronger, sometimes barely perceptible. And right now? What impressions do you get from me? She studied him for a long moment. Curiosity, caution, pain though you're trying to hide it, and beneath it all, a burning desire for freedom. Magnus couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. Is that why they call you a failed experiment? Because your mind was enhanced instead of your body? Partly, she acknowledged, but mostly because I cannot be controlled as easily as my sisters. I see the truths behind the pretty lies our leaders tell. I question when I should obey. These are dangerous traits in our society. In many societies, Magnus agreed, thinking of Earth's own history of suppressing those who challenge authority. There is something else you should know, Naira said after a pause. The binding ceremony, it created a connection between us, one that grows stronger with proximity and time. What kind of connection? A mental link. Already I sense your emotions more clearly than those of others. Eventually you may begin to sense mine as well. Magnus absorbed this information with growing unease. You didn't think to mention this before the ceremony? Would it have changed your decision? She countered. You were offered the choice between taking a mate or returning to certain death in the arena. She had a point, though the idea of sharing his thoughts with anyone, even partially, was deeply uncomfortable. Can you control it? Block the connection? To some extent, she said, distance helps. So does focusing on other things. Is that why you stayed away today? Naira nodded. Partly, but I also have my own training to attend to. Training for what? Instead of answering, she rose and moved to the small window that overlooked the city. There are many things happening in Auris that you don't yet understand, Magnus. Forces at work beneath the surface that even my mother, the Supreme, cannot fully control. What forces? She turned back to him, her expression serious. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another difficult day. Once again, she had deflected his question, but Magnus was too exhausted to press further. He lay back on the sleeping platform, wincing as his battered body protested the movement. Naira extinguished the lights and joined him on the platform, maintaining the same careful distance as the previous night. In the darkness, her voice came soft and unexpected. "There is a resistance," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Humans and Aurians working together against my mother's rule. They hide in the deep forest, growing stronger each day." Magnus held perfectly still, afraid that any movement might stop her revelations. The forest stalkers being driven toward the city, it's no accident. The resistance is clearing territory, establishing bases farther from the mountains. "Why are you telling me this?" Magnus whispered back. "Because soon you will have to make a choice," she replied, "and I want you to make it with open eyes." "What choice?" But Naira had said all she intended to say. She turned away, and soon her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, leaving Magnus alone with questions that multiplied rather than diminished. Days turned into weeks as Magnus settled into the routine of warrior training. His body grew stronger, the techniques more natural, until he could hold his own against all but the most skilled Aurian fighters. Drex remained a harsh taskmaster, but there was a growing respect in the way he corrected Magnus's form or demonstrated a particularly complex maneuver. Coral thrived in their new environment, his natural charm winning over many of the Aurian warriors. He and Vereen appeared genuinely content in each other's company, often seen laughing together during mealtimes or walking arm in arm through the warriors' quarter. Magnus's relationship with Naira was more complicated. They shared living space but little else. She was often absent during the day, attending to what she called her duties, though she never elaborated on what those entailed. At night, they maintained their careful distance on the sleeping platform, rarely speaking beyond practical matters. Yet despite this physical and emotional separation, Magnus found himself increasingly aware of her presence. Sometimes he would know she was nearby before seeing her, a strange pressure at the edge of his consciousness that he came to recognize as her unique mental signature. Occasionally, he would experience flashes of emotion that didn't seem to be his own, brief moments of fear, determination, or even hope that flared and faded like distant lightning. The mental connection she had warned him about was growing stronger. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session where he had finally managed to best Corvo in a sparring match, Magnus returned to their quarters to find Naira already there. She was dressed differently than usual, in fitted garments that resembled those worn by scouts rather than her usual simple attire. "Pack whatever you need," she said without preamble. "We're leaving tonight." Magnus stared at her in confusion. "Leaving? To go where?" "Into the forest. There's someone you need to meet." She tossed him a bundle that contained dark clothing similar to her own. "Put these on. They'll help us move undetected." "You're talking about escape," Magnus realized. "The guards will be distracted," she cut him off. "There's a ceremony tonight honoring the warriors who completed their trials. The attention will be on the celebration, not on us." "And if we're caught," Naira's expression hardened, "then we die. But we die anyway if we stay." "What do you mean?" "My mother has decided that the human experiment has failed to yield the results she wanted. You and Coral were to be the first test subjects, but your genetic compatibility is lower than expected. She plans to terminate both of you and try a different approach with new subjects." The cold certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. "How do you know this?" "I heard her discussing it with her advisors." Naira tapped her temple. "My flaws make me easy to overlook. They forget I can sense their thoughts, even at a distance." Magnus considered their options. Escape seemed like madness. 2 people against an entire city of Aurian warriors. But staying meant certain death. "What about Coral? And the others like us?" "We can't help them right now," Naira said firmly. "But the resistance can. If we reach them, there may be a chance to return for the others." Magnus made his decision. "How do we get past the guards at the city gates?" "We don't." Naira moved to the sleeping platform and pushed it aside, revealing a small trapdoor hidden beneath. "There are tunnels beneath the city, remnants of an older civilization that built Auris long before my people claimed it. Few know they exist." Magnus changed quickly into the dark clothing she had provided. It fit well, designed for stealth and movement rather than protection. These tunnels lead outside the city walls? They lead everywhere, Naira replied, checking a small blade before tucking it into her belt, including to places my mother would rather keep hidden. She handed him a knife and a small pack containing what felt like dried food in a water skin. Ready? Magnus nodded, adrenaline already coursing through his veins. After months of captivity, the prospect of action, of taking control of his fate, was intoxicating. Naira lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow shaft with crude handholds carved into the side. She began to descend, moving with the confidence of someone who had used this route before. Magnus followed, pulling the trapdoor closed above them. The tunnel below was dark and damp, barely high enough for them to stand upright. Naira produced a small light source, a luminescent fungus contained in a clear vial that cast just enough glow to navigate by. This way, she whispered, heading deeper into the labyrinth. Magnus lost track of time as they wound through the underground passages. The air grew cooler and fresher, suggesting they were moving away from the city center. Occasionally, Naira would stop at intersections, closing her eyes briefly before choosing a direction. You've been using these tunnels for a while, Magnus observed during one such pause. Since I was a child, she confirmed. My condition made me an outcast even in my mother's palace. I found solace in exploration. And in contact with the resistance? Naira's eyes widened slightly in surprise. You knew. I suspected, Magnus admitted. Your knowledge of their movements, your readiness to escape. It suggested prior communication. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps the binding works both ways. You're beginning to read me as I read you. They continued through the tunnels until Naira halted before what appeared to be a dead end. She pressed her hands against specific points on the wall, and a section shifted with a soft grinding sound, revealing a narrow opening. The exit is just ahead, she whispered, but we must be careful. Forest stalkers hunt at night, and there may be Aurian patrols. She extinguished their light before proceeding, forcing Magnus to rely on touch and his other senses to follow. A cool breeze carrying the scent of vegetation told him they were approaching the outside world. They emerged from the tunnel into a small clearing surrounded by towering trees unlike any Magnus had seen on Earth. Their trunks twisted in impossible spirals, branches reaching outward like grasping hands, leaves a deep purple in the moonlight. Oris had a single moon, larger and brighter than Earth's, casting everything in silvery blue illumination that was both beautiful and eerie. The forest canopy created patches of absolute darkness between pools of moonlight, perfect for concealment or ambush. Stay close, Naira murmured, drawing her knife. The meeting point is half a night's journey from here. They moved through the forest with careful steps, alert for any sound that might indicate danger. Magnus found himself grateful for the warrior training he'd received. His movements were more controlled now, his awareness of his surroundings sharper. An hour into their journey, Naira suddenly froze, raising a hand in warning. Magnus stopped instantly, straining his senses to detect what had alarmed her. At first, he heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Then came a new sound, the soft crunch of vegetation under heavy feet, moving with deliberate stealth. Naira pulled him down behind a fallen tree trunk, her body tense. Through a gap in the roots, Magnus caught glimpses of blue uniforms moving through the moonlight. An Aurian patrol. 4 warriors, Naira breathed against his ear. Scout formation. They're not looking for us specifically. Yet, Magnus whispered back. They remained motionless as the patrol passed within meters of their hiding place. One warrior paused, looking in their direction with a frown, but eventually moved on without investigating further. When the sounds of the patrol had faded, Naira signaled for them to continue, now moving with even greater caution. The forest grew denser, the trees packed so tightly in places that they had to squeeze between trunks, the rough bark scraping against their clothing. Twice more they had to hide from patrols, and once they detoured around what Naira identified as a forest stalker's territory, marked by claw marks on trees and the lingering smell of its musk. Finally, they reached a small stream cutting through the forest floor. Naira followed it upstream, the sound of running water masking their footsteps. After another half hour, she stopped at a waterfall cascading down a rocky outcropping. We're here, she announced, scanning the surrounding area. I don't see anyone, Magnus said, also searching for signs of human or Aurian presence. They'll see us first, Naira replied. That's how it works. As if on cue, a low whistle came from the rocks above the waterfall. Naira answered with a similar call, and moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows. A human woman with dark hair cut short, dressed in a patchwork of Aurian and human clothing. A bow was slung across her back, and a knife similar to Naira's hung at her belt. You're late, the woman called down softly. We were about to leave. Patrols are heavier than usual, Naira explained. We had to be careful. The woman made a hand signal and two more figures appeared, an Aurian male and another human, both armed and wearing the same mix of clothing styles. This is the one? The woman asked, studying Magnus with open curiosity. Yes, Naira confirmed. Magnus, this is Mira. She leads this cell of the resistance. Mira nodded in acknowledgement. Follow me. It's not safe to linger here. They climbed a narrow path alongside the waterfall, the rocks slippery with spray. At the top, a hidden trail led deeper into the forest, eventually bringing them to a cluster of massive trees whose roots had grown together to form natural caves. Inside one of these root caves, carefully concealed from above, was a small encampment. A dozen people, both human and Aurian, moved about quietly, tending to various tasks. Some were cleaning weapons, others preparing food or treating wounds. All looked up with wary expressions as the newcomers entered. Welcome to Shadow Root, Mira said, gesturing around the space. One of several resistance bases in the deep forest. Magnus took in the scene with amazement. Humans and Aurians working together, apparently as equals. Something he had thought impossible after his experiences in the city. How long has this been happening? He asked. The resistance. 3 years, Mira replied, since the Supreme began her breeding program with captured humans. Some of us escaped. Some like Krell here. She nodded toward the Aurian male who had accompanied them. Disagreed with their leader's methods and chose exile. And you? Magnus turned to Naira. How long have you been part of this? 2 years, she answered, since I discovered what my mother really intended for the human colonists. Mira led them to a small fire where food was being prepared. Eat, rest. Tomorrow we have much to discuss about what happens next. The meal was simple but filling, roasted meat and forest tubers seasoned with unfamiliar spices. As they ate, Magnus observed the interactions between humans and Aurians in the camp. There was an easy camaraderie that spoke of shared hardship and mutual respect. You're wondering how we overcame generations of conflict, Mira commented, noting his attention. It seems unlikely, Magnus admitted. Necessity, she shrugged. Both our peoples face extinction if the Supreme's plans succeed. She doesn't want coexistence. She wants absorption. Humans as breeding stock to strengthen Aurian bloodlines, with no identity or culture of our own. How do you intend to stop her? You're badly outnumbered. Numbers aren't everything, Krell interjected. He was older than most Aurians Magnus had met, with battle scars that suggested a lifetime of fighting. We have advantages the city dwellers lack, knowledge of the forest, the element of surprise, and motivation born of fighting for our very existence. And we have Naira, Mira added with a respectful nod toward her. Her abilities have saved us more times than I can count. Naira looked uncomfortable with the praise. I do what I can. She can sense patrols before they reach us, Mira explained to Magnus. Warn us of betrayal or deception. Guide us to other humans being held captive. Useful skills, Magnus acknowledged, beginning to understand why Naira had been so secretive about her duties in the city. But now her cover is blown, Krell said grimly. Once the Supreme realizes you're both gone, she'll know Naira has been helping us. Which accelerates our timeline, Mira agreed. We need to move forward with the plan sooner than anticipated. What plan? Magnus asked. The three resistance leaders exchanged glances before Mira nodded. We're going to infiltrate the city during the Great Hunt Festival. Free the human captives and end the Supreme's rule. Magnus stared at her in disbelief. That's suicide. The city is heavily guarded, and during festivals, security is even tighter. Which is why we need you, Naira said quietly. You've been inside the warriors' quarter, trained with them, learned their routines and weaknesses. And, Mira added, you're bound to Naira. That connection gives you an advantage no other human has. Magnus looked between them, understanding dawning. You planned this from the beginning. The selection ceremony, my choice of Naira. Not exactly, Naira interrupted. I had no way of knowing you would choose me. That was unexpected. But fortunate, Krell added. The binding strengthens her abilities and gives you limited access to them. Together, you'll be our eyes inside the city. It was a lot to process. Just hours ago, Magnus had been a captive with limited options. Now he was being asked to join a revolution. What about Coral and the other humans in the city? We'll free them all, Mira promised. That's the goal, to break the Supreme's power and liberate both our peoples from her rule. Magnus thought about his fellow captives, about the life of controlled violence he'd been living, about the truth Naira had revealed regarding their planned execution. He thought about Earth, so distant now it seemed like a dream, and the human colonies struggling to survive on this harsh world. I'm in, he decided. Tell me what you need me to do. The next days were filled with intensive planning and preparation. Maps of the city were drawn from memory, with Magnus adding details about the warriors' quarter and training grounds. Naira provided information about palace security and the locations where human captives were held. Mira's resistance fighters taught Magnus forest survival skills, how to move silently through dense undergrowth, identify dangerous plants and animals, find water and edible food. In return, he shared the fighting techniques he had learned from the Aurian warriors, helping the humans improve their combat abilities. Throughout it all, Magnus found himself drawn closer to Naira. The mental connection between them strengthened daily until he could sense her emotional state even when she was out of sight. Sometimes, when their focus was particularly aligned during planning sessions, he caught fragmented thoughts, not complete ideas, but impressions and images that helped him understand her perspective. One evening, as they sat apart from the others near the edge of the encampment, Magnus finally asked the question that had been on his mind since their escape. Why did you choose to help humans? Your own mother is leading the effort against us. Naira was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant trees where moonlight filtered through leaves. Do you remember when I told you that my procedures enhanced my mind rather than my body? Magnus nodded. What I didn't explain is what that actually means. She turned to face him, her unusual eyes reflecting the moonlight. I don't just sense thoughts or emotions. I feel them, experience them as though they were my own. When humans were brought to the arena, forced to fight for survival, I felt their fear, their pain, their desperate hope for freedom. She looked down at her scarred hands. My mother sees only resources to be exploited. I see people with lives and dreams as valid as our own. I couldn't stand by and watch that suffering, not when I experienced it alongside them. That must be overwhelming, Magnus said softly, trying to imagine what it would be like to carry others' emotions alongside his own. It was, at first, she acknowledged. I nearly went mad until I learned to control it, to build mental barriers. But even then, some experiences break through. Extreme pain, terror, joy. Is that happening now? With me? A small smile touched her lips. With you, it's different. The binding created a channel, a connection that flows both ways. Your emotions don't overwhelm me. They complement mine. She hesitated, then added quietly, That's why I was surprised when you chose me at the ceremony. I felt your genuine preference, not pity or strategy, but true choice. No one had ever looked at me and seen value before. Something shifted between them in that moment, a wall coming down, a distance closing. Magnus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were cool against his skin, but they wrapped around his with surprising strength. I chose well, he said simply. They sat together in comfortable silence as the camp settled for the night, the mental connection between them humming with unspoken understanding. The days that followed were filled with frantic activity as the resistance prepared for their assault on the city. Weapons were sharpened, strategies refined, fighters trained in the specific roles they would play. Scouts reported increased activity around the city perimeter. The Supreme had indeed noticed their absence and heightened security in response. The plan that emerged was daring but potentially effective. The Great Hunt Festival included a procession through the city streets, with the Supreme and her court moving from the palace to the arena where ceremonial combats would take place. This procession would provide their best opportunity to strike, when the rulers were exposed and the attention of both guards and citizens was focused on the spectacle. You and Naira will enter the city 2 days before the festival, Mira explained during the final planning session. Using the tunnels, you'll reach the lower quarter, where sympathizers will hide you until the procession begins. Our people inside the palace will ensure that security around the human captives is minimal during the ceremony, Krell added. Once the attack on the procession begins, you'll move to free them. And the Supreme? Magnus asked. She's mine, Naira said, her voice cold in a way Magnus had never heard before. I'll deal with my mother. The night before they were to return to the city, Magnus found himself unable to sleep. He left the root cave where most of the fighters rested and walked to a small clearing nearby, needing space to clear his head. The enormity of what they were attempting weighed heavily on him. If they failed, not only would he and Naira die, but the entire resistance movement might be crushed, dooming both humans and Aurian dissidents to the Supreme's mercy, or lack thereof. You're troubled, Naira's voice came from behind him. She moved to stand beside him, her presence in his mind a gentle pressure that had become oddly comforting. Aren't you? He asked. Tomorrow we walk back into the city we fled, risking everything on a plan that has 1,000 ways to fail. Yes, she agreed simply, but it's a risk worth taking. Magnus turned to face her. In the moonlight, with her guard down and her focus entirely on him, she was beautiful in a way her perfect sisters could never match. A beauty born of character, courage, and quiet strength. If we succeed, he said carefully, what happens afterward? Between us? Naira's expression softened. The binding is permanent, Magnus. Even if we wanted to sever it, the changes it has created in both of us cannot be undone. That's not what I asked. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. What do you want to happen? Instead of answering with words, Magnus leaned forward and kissed her. For a moment she was still with surprise, then she responded with unexpected intensity, her arms wrapping around him as the mental connection between them flared like a supernova. In that kiss, Magnus felt everything she couldn't or wouldn't say aloud. Her fear of rejection, her growing feelings for him, her hope for a future neither of them had dared to imagine until this moment. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Naira's eyes were bright with emotion. That, she said softly, is what I want to happen. They returned to the camp together, finding a private corner where they could lie close, no longer maintaining the careful distance that had characterized their earlier nights. As sleep finally claimed him, Magnus's last thought was that whatever dangers tomorrow brought, he would face them with her at his side, their minds and hearts aligned in purpose. The return to Auris was tense but uneventful. The tunnel system proved as effective for entry as it had for escape, allowing them to reach the lower quarter without encountering guards. Their contact, an elderly Aurian woman whose son had been executed for speaking against the Supreme, hid them in a storage cellar beneath her modest dwelling. The city is on edge, she told them in hushed tones. More patrols, more questions. The Supreme is furious about your disappearance, especially yours, daughter of Ariana. Has she changed the festival plans? Naira asked. No, her pride wouldn't allow it. To alter the great hunt would be to admit fear, and she fears nothing, or so she claims. The old woman's expression was grim, but she has doubled the guard around the procession route. That complicates things, Magnus observed. We expected as much, Naira replied. The others will adjust. They spent a tense day in hiding, going over the plan again and again, anticipating complications and planning responses. Through their strengthened mental connection, Magnus and Naira practiced coordinating without words, a system of shared impressions and images that would allow them to communicate silently during the mission. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright, the blue sun of Aria casting its distinctive light across the city. From their hiding place, they could hear the sounds of celebration beginning, drums beating, voices calling, the movement of people through the streets as citizens prepared to witness the procession. Mira arrived disguised as a market vendor, her cart laden with festival foods that provided cover for the weapons hidden beneath. "Everyone is in position," she reported. "The attack begins when the Supreme reaches the central square. That's your signal to move toward the warrior's quarter." "And the captives?" Magnus asked. "Our people inside have confirmed they'll be lightly guarded. Most warriors will be either in the procession or securing the route." She handed them each a short blade designed to be concealed under clothing. "For emergencies only. We want to avoid fighting until the main attack begins." The three of them clasped hands in a circle, a gesture of solidarity that transcended their different origins. Then Mira was gone, blending back into the crowd of vendors setting up along the procession route. "It's time," Naira said as the drums grew louder, signaling the approach of the Supreme's entourage. They left their hiding place, moving through back alleys parallel to the main street, where crowds were gathering. Magnus had wrapped a scarf around the lower part of his face, obscuring his features, while Naira wore a hooded cloak that concealed her distinctive scars. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. They would make their way to the warrior's quarter during the distraction of the main attack, free the human captives, and lead them to the tunnels where resistance fighters would guide them to safety. Meanwhile, other teams would target key security points throughout the city, creating chaos that would prevent an organized response. They reached a position near the central square, just as the procession came into view. At the front walked Aurian warriors in ceremonial armor, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. Behind them came nobles in elaborate costumes, followed by hunters leading captured forest beasts in cages, the prizes of previous great hunts, displayed for the populace's appreciation. And then came the Supreme herself, carried on an elevated platform by 8 strong warriors. Ariana was resplendent in robes of deep purple, adorned with silver symbols of her authority. Her expression was cold and proud as she surveyed the cheering crowds. Beside her stood Coral and Vereen, both dressed in festival garments that marked them as favored members of the court. Coral looked uncomfortable despite his finery, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd as though searching for something or someone. "He's looking for you," Naira whispered. "He thinks you might still be alive. Can you reach him? Through your abilities?" She shook her head. "Not without the binding. He's too far, and there are too many minds between us." The procession continued into the square, where it would pause for the Supreme to address her people before continuing to the arena. This was the moment the resistance had chosen to strike, when the attention of both guards and citizens would be focused in one direction. Magnus tensed as the Supreme's platform reached the center of the square. Any moment now. A commotion erupted at the far side of the square. Smoke billowed suddenly from multiple points around the perimeter, obscuring visibility. Shouts of alarm rose from the crowd as hidden resistance fighters emerged from their positions, targeting the guards nearest to them. "Now," Magnus urged, and they broke from their concealment, using the growing chaos as cover to head toward the warrior's quarter. They had barely gone 10 steps when a shout came from behind them. "There!" The traitor and her human. Magnus whirled to see a patrol of Aurian warriors pushing through the panicking crowd toward them, weapons drawn. At their head was Drex, the weapons master, his face twisted with rage. "Run!" Naira grabbed Magnus's arm, pulling him into a narrow alley as spears clattered against the wall behind them. They fled through the maze of back streets, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Magnus's warrior training served him well now, his body responding automatically to the demands of speed and agility as they vaulted obstacles and squeezed through tight passages. "This way," Naira panted, directing them toward a busy market square where festival vendors had set up stalls. They plunged into the crowd, weaving between shoppers and merchants, using the density of bodies to break line of sight with their pursuers. For a moment it seemed they had lost them. Then a cry went up from the far side of the square as another patrol spotted them. "We need a new plan," Magnus said as they ducked behind a stall selling festival mass. "We'll never reach the warrior's quarter like this." Naira closed her eyes briefly, her face tight with concentration. The attack in the main square is working. Most of the guards have been pulled there, but they've sealed the city gates and doubled patrols near the known tunnel entrances. "What about the captives?" "Still lightly guarded, but we'll never reach them with half the city looking for us." She opened her eyes, determination hardening her features. "We need to split up." "No," Magnus said immediately. "We stay together." Listen to me, she insisted. I can create a diversion. Draw the patrols away. You're less recognizable. You can reach the captives and lead them to the tunnel entrance near the old temple. It's too dangerous. If they catch you, they won't kill me immediately. She cut him off. I'm still the Supreme's daughter. They'll take me to her first. Magnus gripped her shoulders. Which is exactly why I'm not letting you do this. We find another way. Before she could argue further, a new commotion erupted nearby. Shouts and the clash of weapons indicated another skirmish had broken out. The resistance was attacking throughout the city as planned. Using the renewed chaos as cover, they slipped away from the market and into a residential area where the streets were nearly empty, most citizens having gone to watch the procession. There's another way into the warriors' quarter, Magnus said as they paused to catch their breath in the shadow of a building. Through the training grounds. If the attack is drawing guards away as you said, it might be less defended. Naira nodded. It's worth trying. They moved with greater caution now, staying to shadows and checking each intersection before proceeding. Smoke rose from multiple points across the city, and the distant sounds of fighting suggested the resistance attack was in full swing. The training grounds appeared deserted when they finally reached them. The practice weapons left scattered as the warriors had rushed to defend the procession. They crossed the open space quickly, keeping low, and reached the entrance to the warriors' quarter without encountering resistance. Something's wrong, Naira whispered as they approached the building where human captives were housed. It's too quiet. Magnus felt it too, a sense of wrongness that prickled along his spine. They should have encountered at least some guards, yet the way lay open before them. A trap, he suggested. Naira closed her eyes, reaching out with her abilities. I sense waiting, anticipation. Her eyes snapped open. Yes, a trap. They're inside, expecting us to walk right in. How many? At least 6 warriors. And, she frowned, someone else. Someone familiar. They retreated to discuss options, finding shelter behind a storage shed used for training equipment. The sound of distant fighting was growing louder. The battle was spreading throughout the city. We need to draw them out, Magnus decided. If we can separate them, deal with them one by one. Or find another way in, Naira suggested. These buildings all connect through interior corridors. If we enter through a different section. A rustling sound from behind made them both spin, weapons ready. A figure emerged from the shadows, Coral, his festival garments torn and dirty. I thought it might be you, he said, his voice low. When the attack started and I saw the Supreme's reaction, I knew you had to be involved. Magnus kept his blade ready. Are you alone? Yes. Coral raised his hands to show he was unarmed. I slipped away during the chaos. Vereen helped me. She's not what she seems, Magnus. None of them are. What do you mean? Naira asked sharply. The perfect daughters, the whole selection ceremony, it was a test. The Supreme wanted to see which humans could be manipulated, which would choose appearance over substance. He looked at Magnus with newfound respect. You passed without even knowing it was a test. And you failed then, Magnus realized. Coral nodded grimly. Vereen has been reporting everything I say and do, but she's developed feelings, real ones. She warned me that the Supreme plans to eliminate all humans once she has what she needs from us. Which is what exactly? Naira pressed. Something about genetic compatibility. The Supreme believes human adaptability combined with Aurian strength would create offspring capable of conquering neighboring star systems. He shook his head. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that there are 23 humans in that building, and they've been sedated for medical procedures scheduled after the festival. Magnus and Naira exchanged alarmed glances. We need to move now, Magnus said, before those procedures begin. The trap is still in place, Naira reminded him. 6 warriors, plus whoever else I sensed. I can help, Coral offered. I know a service entrance the guards don't use. The workers who bring food and supplies, they have their own way in. It was a risk trusting Coral after his previous choices, but they had few options and time was running short. Magnus nodded. Show us. Coral led them around the perimeter of the warriors' quarter to a small, unmarked door, partially hidden by stacked supply crates. This leads to the kitchens. From there, we can reach the captives' quarters without passing the main entrance where the guards are waiting. The door was unlocked, suggesting the staff had left in haste when the attack began. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a prep area where half-prepared meals lay abandoned. Moving silently through the kitchen, they reached a corridor that Magnus recognized as leading to the residential section. Coral pointed left. That way. Third door on the right. They advanced cautiously, Magnus in the lead with Naira close behind, her senses extended to detect any nearby mines. Coral brought up the rear, his movements betraying his nervousness. When they reached the indicated door, Magnus pressed his ear against it, hearing nothing from within. He looked to Naira, who nodded. The captives were inside, their sedated minds registering only faintly to her abilities. "No guards inside," she whispered, "but they're nearby." Patrolling the main corridor, Magnus tested the door handle. Locked. He turned to Coral. "Any ideas?" Coral reached into his garment and produced a key. "Vereen gave me this, said it would open any door in this section." The key worked smoothly, the lock disengaging with a soft click. Magnus eased the door open, revealing a large dormitory-style room where human captives lay on sleeping platforms, their breathing deep and regular, clearly sedated as Coral had said. "We need to wake them," Magnus whispered. "The sedation is mild," Coral explained, designed to keep them compliant, not unconscious. Strong stimulation should rouse them. They moved among the sleeping humans, shaking them firmly and covering their mouths to prevent any loud reactions upon waking. Most came to quickly, confusion giving way to recognition and hope, as Magnus and Coral explained in hushed tones that rescue was at hand. Within minutes, all 23 captives were awake and gathering what few possessions they had. They were a mix of colonists captured during raids and arena fighters who had survived their bouts, all thin and bearing the marks of harsh treatment, but with fire rekindling in their eyes at the prospect of freedom. "We move in groups of 5, Magnus instructed. "Coral will lead the first group to the tunnel entrance. Naira and I will bring the rest once the way is clear." Coral nodded, selecting 4 of the stronger captives to accompany him. "Be careful," he said to Magnus, "and thank you for coming back for us." With that, he led his group out, moving with the stealth Magnus had taught him during their arena days. Naira watched until they disappeared down the corridor, then turned to the remaining captives. "The next group goes in 10 minutes, she said. "Be ready." But before the time had elapsed, Naira suddenly stiffened, her eyes widening in alarm. "Someone's coming." Multiple someones, armed. Magnus moved to the door, cracking it open just enough to peek into the corridor. What he saw made his blood run cold. A full patrol of Aurian warriors, led by a figure he recognized instantly despite never having seen her in battle gear before. Ariana, the Supreme, had come personally to deal with the escaping captives. He closed the door silently, turning back to the room. "We need another way out. Now!" The captives looked around frantically, but the dormitory had only the one entrance. They were trapped. "The ventilation system," suggested one of the colonists, pointing to a grate near the ceiling. "It connects to the central air circulation for the building." I was assigned to maintenance before they moved me to the arena. Magnus examined the grate. It was large enough for a person to squeeze through, designed for the comfort of warriors rather than the security of prisoners. "How far does it extend?" "Throughout the building and connects to external vents," the colonist replied. "I can guide us." "Do it," Magnus decided. "Quickly." With the help of several captives, they removed the grate and began helping people into the ventilation shaft. It was a tight fit, requiring them to crawl on hands and knees, but it was their only option. Naira, monitoring the corridor with her abilities, suddenly gasped. "They're right outside. They know we're here." The door burst open, Aurian warriors flooding into the room with weapons ready. Ariana stepped through last, her ceremonial robes replaced by fitted armor that emphasized her status as not just a ruler, but a warrior. "Daughter," she said, her voice cold as she spotted Naira, "I should have known you would return for these pets." Half the captives were still in the room, frozen in fear at the sudden intrusion. Magnus moved to place himself between them and the Aurian warriors, knife ready though he knew it would do little against their superior weapons and numbers. "Let them go," he said firmly. Your quarrel is with us, not them. Oriana's laugh was without humor. My quarrel is with all who defy the natural order. Humans are meant to serve Aurians, to strengthen our bloodlines through carefully managed breeding. Those who cannot accept this have no place in my vision. Your vision is flawed, Naira countered, moving to stand beside Magnus. Both our peoples can thrive together as equals. The resistance has proven that. Ah yes, your precious resistance. Ariana's smile was triumphant. Even now they fall to my warriors throughout the city. Did you think I was unaware of your little rebellion? That I did not plan for this day? A sinking feeling settled in Magnus's stomach. Had they walked into an even larger trap than they realized? Your attack was anticipated, Ariana continued. Your fighters are being captured as we speak. Soon all resistance will be eliminated, and my vision will proceed unimpeded. You're lying, Naira said, but uncertainty colored her voice. Am I? Reach out with your abilities, daughter. Feel the truth of what is happening across Oris. Naira closed her eyes briefly, her face paling as she extended her senses. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. What is it? Magnuson asked urgently. Ambushes, Naira replied, her voice hollow, at every key point in the city. They were waiting for us. Ariana's satisfaction was palpable. Did you think you were the only one with special abilities, daughter? Did you never wonder why I kept you alive despite your imperfections? Understanding dawned on Naira's face. You can sense thoughts too. Not as strongly as you, but enough to detect betrayal, to plant false impressions, to mislead. Ariana stepped closer. You have been useful in your way, leading the resistance to expose themselves, bringing their leaders into my grasp. Magnus felt sick. All their planning, all their hope, undone because they had underestimated their enemy. He glanced at the ventilation shaft where half the captives had already escaped. At least some might still reach freedom if he and Naira could buy them time. It's not over, he said, shifting his stance to a fighting position. People who taste freedom never forget its flavor. You may win today, but others will rise tomorrow. Brave words from a doomed man, Ariana replied dismissively. She gestured to her warriors. Take them. Kill any who resist. The warriors advanced, their weapons ready. Magnus knew they couldn't win this fight, but they could create a diversion for those still escaping. He met Naira's eyes, a silent communication passing between them through their mental bond. Together they charged. What followed was a blur of desperate combat. Magnus's training with the Aurian warriors served him well, allowing him to anticipate their moves and counter effectively despite being outnumbered. Naira fought with surprising skill, her smaller size and quickness making her a difficult target. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed they might actually create enough chaos for the remaining captives to escape. 3 warriors lay unconscious or wounded, and the others were proceeding with greater caution, respect in their eyes as they faced the human Aurian pair. Then Ariana herself stepped forward, drawing a ceremonial blade that gleamed with deadly purpose. Enough of this. I will end it myself. She moved with a speed and grace that belied her regal appearance, her attacks precise and powerful. Magnus found himself driven back step by step, barely able to parry her strikes. She was not just a ruler, but a highly trained warrior, possibly the best he had ever faced. You fight well, human, she acknowledged as their blades locked. In another life, you might have made a worthy general in my army. I prefer freedom to service, Magnus grunted, disengaging and circling warily. Across the room, Naira was similarly pressed by 2 warriors who had cornered her against a wall. Despite her valiant defense, it was clear she couldn't hold out much longer. Desperation fueled Magnus's next attack. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Ariana's legs in a move Drex had taught him. The Supreme stumbled but recovered quickly, countering with a slash that opened a long cut along Magnus's arm. Pain lanced through him, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the fight. The remaining captives had used the distraction to reach the ventilation shaft. If he could just hold out a little longer. A cry from Naira drew his attention momentarily. A mistake. Ariana's blade flashed, and suddenly Magnus was on his knees, a burning pain in his side where her weapon had found its mark. Not deep enough to be fatal, but debilitating nonetheless. Yield, Ariana commanded, her blade at his throat. Or die here. Magnus glared up at her, defiance in his eyes despite his position. Across the room, Naira had also been subdued, warriors holding her arms as blood trickled from a wound on her forehead. You've lost, Ariana stated flatly. Your resistance is crushed. Your escape routes blocked. Your allies captured or killed. She was right, Magnus realized with grim acceptance. They had failed. The careful planning, the hopes for freedom, all undone by the Supreme's foresight and their own underestimation of her abilities. But as he prepared to meet his end with what dignity he could muster, a new sound reached his ears. Shouts from the corridor, the clash of weapons, voices calling in both human and Aurian tongues. Ariana frowned, turning toward the door just as it burst open to reveal Mira, bloodied but unbowed, leading a group of resistance fighters, both human and Aurian. Sorry we're late, Mira called, her blade already in motion as she engaged the nearest warrior. Ran into some trouble at the north gate. The room erupted into chaos once more as the resistance fighters poured in, their surprise attack catching the Supreme's forces off guard. In the confusion, Magnus rolled away from Ariana, clutching his wounded side as he sought a weapon. A hand gripped his shoulder, Krell, the Aurian resistance leader, helping him to his feet. Can you fight? Magnus nodded grimly, accepting the blade Krell offered. Always. Across the room, Naira had broken free of her captors and was making her way toward her mother, determination etched on her face. Ariana saw her coming and raised her weapon, mother and daughter circling each other in the eye of the battle storm. You would strike down your own blood? Ariana asked, her voice carrying over the sounds of combat. You lost the right to call me daughter when you treated me as a failed experiment, Naira replied, her blade steady in her hand. When you used me to betray those who only wanted freedom. They clashed, their movements almost too fast to follow. Despite her imperfections, Naira fought with a grace that matched her mother's, their styles similar yet distinct. Where Ariana was power and precision, Naira was fluidity and adaptation. Magnus wanted to help her, but he had his own opponents to deal with, warriors who recognized him from training and targeted him specifically. He fought through pain and fatigue, his warrior training combining with arena-honed survival instincts to keep him alive minute by bloody minute. The tide of battle shifted gradually in the resistance's favor. More fighters arrived, suggesting that Ariana's claim of crushing the rebellion had been premature or false. The Supreme's warriors found themselves outnumbered and surrounded. In the center of the room, the duel between mother and daughter reached its climax. Ariana, realizing her forces were losing, fought with renewed desperation, her attacks becoming wilder, less controlled. Naira maintained her composure, using her mother's aggression against her, a technique Magnus recognized from his own training. When the opening came, Naira took it without hesitation. A feint, a pivot, and suddenly her blade was at her mother's throat, their positions reversed from moments before. Yield, Naira demanded, echoing Ariana's earlier command. The room fell silent, all eyes on the Supreme and her daughter. Ariana's expression was a mixture of rage and disbelief, unable to comprehend that she had been defeated, and by the daughter she had dismissed as flawed. Never, she spat. Kill me if you must, but I will not surrender to inferiors. Naira held her mother's gaze steadily. Then you leave us no choice. But instead of striking the killing blow, she stepped back, lowering her weapon. Take her, she instructed two resistance fighters. She will face judgment for her crimes against both our peoples. Ariana's expression twisted with fury as she was restrained, her weapon taken, her defeat complete. You are no daughter of mine, she hissed. No, Naira agreed calmly. I am something better. I am free. With the Supreme captured and her warriors either defeated or surrendering, the resistance fighters quickly secured the building. Mira approached Magnus and Naira, her face grim despite their victory. The city is mostly ours, she reported, but at a heavy cost. Many fell in the initial ambushes. How did you find us? Magnus asked. We thought all was lost. We adapted, Mira replied simply. When we realized the ambushes were waiting, we changed tactics, used secondary routes, split into smaller groups. Coral reached us with news of your location, and we gathered what forces we could. Coral made it out. Relief flooded through Magnus. Mira nodded. Him and the first group of captives, they're safe at the tunnel entrance, waiting for the all-clear to move to the forest bases. Naira, who had been quiet since her confrontation with her mother, suddenly swayed on her feet. Magnus moved quickly to support her, noting with alarm the pallor of her skin and the blood still flowing from her head wound. "She needs medical attention," he said urgently. "We all do," Mira acknowledged, looking at Magnus's own injuries. "But first, we need to secure our position. The Supreme's capture will create a power vacuum that others will rush to fill." As if summoned by her words, a new group entered the room. Aurian warriors led by a familiar face. Drex, the weapons master, surveyed the scene with an unreadable expression. The resistance fighters tensed, weapons ready for another fight. But Drex raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "The Supreme has fallen," he stated, his deep voice carrying across the room. "The old ways have failed us." He approached Naira, stopping at a respectful distance. To everyone's shock, he knelt, bowing his head. "The warrior's heart sees truth when others are blind. You chose what was real over what appeared perfect," he said, looking up at Naira. "As weapons master, I pledge my blade to your cause. The warriors will follow my lead." One by one, the Aurian warriors behind him also knelt, their weapons laid down in submission. It was an astonishing turn of events. Elite warriors acknowledging defeat and offering allegiance to the rebellion. "Why?" Naira asked, her voice weak but steady. "Why now?" "Many of us have questioned the Supreme's methods," Drex admitted. "The treatment of humans as breeding stock dishonors both our peoples. We are warriors, not breeders of slaves." He glanced at Magnus. "Your human proved that in the training grounds. Fighting spirit knows no species." It was not a complete victory. There would still be Aurians loyal to the old regime, battles yet to be fought, wounds both physical and social to heal. But it was a beginning, a chance for both peoples to forge a new path together. As the resistance fighters began organizing the evacuation of wounded and the securing of key positions throughout the city, Magnus helped Naira to a quiet corner where a healer could tend to her injuries. "You did it," he said softly as the healer cleaned the cut on her forehead. "You changed everything." "We did it," she corrected, reaching for his hand. "The binding made us stronger together than either of us could be alone." The mental connection between them hummed with shared emotions: relief, exhaustion, hope, and something deeper that neither had yet named, but both felt growing stronger with each passing day. "What happens now?" Magnus asked, wincing as his own wounds were treated. Naira's expression was thoughtful. "Rebuilding, healing, learning to live together as equals rather than captors and captives." She squeezed his hand. "It won't be easy." "Few worthwhile things are," he replied. Days later, as the dust of revolution settled and the new coalition government of humans and Aurians began taking shape, Magnus stood on a balcony overlooking the city of Horus. The blue sun was setting, casting long shadows across buildings that had once represented oppression, but now held the promise of a different future. Naira joined him, her wounds healing well, her presence in his mind a comforting constant. "The last of the resistance fighters have arrived from the forest," she reported, "and word has reached the human colonies. They're sending representatives to discuss formal relations." "And your mother?" "Confined but unharmed. Some call for her execution, but I cannot condone it. Justice, yes. Vengeance, no." She leaned against the balcony rail beside him. "The council wants me to serve as an intermediary between our peoples. They say my unique perspective makes me suited for the role." Magnus smiled. "From failed experiment to diplomatic leader. Quite a journey." "One I wouldn't have completed without you," she said softly. "When you chose me at the ceremony, when everyone laughed at your selection of the ugliest daughter." "Not ugliest," Magnus corrected firmly. "Most real, most true." She smiled, the expression transforming her scarred face into something truly beautiful. "The binding between us has changed both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined." "For the better, I think," Magnus said, drawing her closer. As they stood together watching darkness fall over a city being reborn, Magnus reflected on the strange path that had brought him here, from captive to gladiator to revolutionary to whatever he was becoming now. The journey had been marked by pain and loss, but also by discovery and hope. And through it all, the most unexpected discovery had been Naira herself, the imperfect daughter who had proven more valuable than all her sisters combined. In choosing her, he had found not just an ally but a partner whose strength complemented his own, whose mind touched his in ways that transcended physical connection. In the growing twilight, they turned toward each other, no words needed between minds so closely linked. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. Human and Aurian, bound by choice rather than ceremony, united in the belief that freedom and dignity were birthrights of all thinking beings, regardless of the color of their skin or the world of their origin.